here in the traditional territories of the Coast and Strait Salish peoples. Specifically, we recognize the Lekwungen people, known today as the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations, and their connections to these lands continue to this day. Up first is approval of the agenda, which is usually a bit of a rubber stamp, but just looking at the agenda and the interest that we've had on one agenda item in particular, I anticipate we may have a fairly lengthy piece on our section 7.2. And so I'm just wondering if council is amenable, I'm just going to look around the table here, that we might amend the agenda to just deal with sections 8 and 9 first, and then we'll come back to section 7. Is that okay? So I can have a motion to approve the agenda as amended. Moved and seconded. Any discussion on that? Because if not, I can flip this around and take a motion to amend. Oh, okay. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. We have next item 3.1, which is the regular council minutes of February 12th. Can I have a mover and seconder, and then I just need to make a clarifying statement on this one. I appreciate to Councillor Watson pointing out in the language that was provided in the agenda, which was moved. This is for the traffic change controls on Henderson. The wording is sort of conjoins two things that is prepare the traffic control orders along Henderson Road and Cedar Hill Cross Road, and then also includes research and recommendations into changes to parking in adjacent areas. I just want to make sure that we're clear, and we can just have a note on this meeting so that we're all really clear on what that means, because the language wasn't necessarily that transparent. So what this does is it approves the changes on those streets to 24-hour cycling paths. And the second part of the motion, and that was clarified with some comments in the meeting, asked for additional information from staff to address issues like parking on the side streets, additional crosswalks, and possible parking on street. So designs are made ready before substantial pipe or road capital projects proceed on those corridors. So that was what was captured in the thing, but it wasn't really captured in the minutes. So I thought, and I appreciate Councillor Watson sort of flagging that the motion in the option 2 did not really make it that clear based on the conversation. So that's all. That's the only thing I just wanted to make sure I clarified in the minutes. Is there anything else on the minutes that people wish to flag, change, amend? No. All right. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. I move to section 4, which is 2 committee of the whole and advisory design panel minutes, so we can receive both of those at the same time. Moved and seconded, or we don't debate them. They were given to us as approved. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. My remarks are fairly short today. I just want to remind people that if you can spread the word, that we're posting the project lead to help with the Help Lead the Marina project. The Board of Variance openings are closing very shortly, and I just want to express my appreciation to Councillor Appleton for organizing, and for all the councillors who showed up for the Coldest Night of the Year walk, which happened on the weekend. I was walking in colder weather in Montreal, so I couldn't be there, but I understand it was well attended and lots of money raised, and I really appreciate, for many years in a row now, we've had a substantial team of councillors go down and participate in that event. And so thank you, Councillor Appleton, for helping organize it, and all the councillors for showing up. We've moved to section 6, and I'm just going to remind anybody who's online and wishing to speak to items on the agenda, we will be doing sections 8 and 9 before we get to section 7. So if you're interested, please don't go away from your stream. We'll be asking for public input on at least section 9 if anybody has any comments. At this point, section 6 is a general community comment section, so this is not for things on the agenda. We'll have an opportunity when those items come up, but just things of general interest to the municipality of Oak Bay. You have up to 3 minutes, and we have a section of time set aside here. And enjoy people. Yes. Welcome back, Mr. Taddy. The rule of great demonstrator here of what to do. We have just state your name and municipality of residence. And
Tim Taddy, Oak Bay, and you turn on the mic. Thank you. I know this is the 3rd time I've been here recently, so hopefully you see me as an engaged citizen and not a pest. I really appreciate the opportunity to provide citizens to speak in a very transparent, open way. This relates to housing, and I know you're going to have a lot in your agenda in the coming months, but there was one item that just might get lost a little bit in the bigger discussion. We've only just, after many years, approved our secondary suites and have a framework for that. And the province, in part, I think quite wisely, is limiting short-term rentals to 90 days or less, principal residence and a secondary suite or an accessory building attached to that principal residence, as you'd well know. I see our secondary suites as the only affordable accommodation in Oak Bay. And I think that was the motivation of council and all of you in putting that forward. A quick look at the most popular rental site, short-term rental site, brings up close to a dozen, just in 5 minutes, of short-term rentals in Oak Bay, ranging from $250 a night to $1,200, $1,400 a night. Alarmingly, it brings up suites, secondary suites, which we've just validated for as much as $400, $420, $500 a night. $12,000 a month. It's going to undermine, these are when it's prohibited by our Oak Bay bylaw. It was super easy to find. I'm aware of a number that are being booked full-time. So we're talking about $12,000, $14,000 a month competing with long-term rental. And so I just wanted to alert council that I think it's a bigger issue, that the market forces are strong. And often what we found this always in Oak Bay with housing, the market forces will outpace your ability to set policy and enforce. So I just wanted to stress this issue, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taddy. That is certainly a topic of much discussion happening right now, both here and in the province. So appreciate you flagging that. Any other topics of general interest to Oak Bay? I'm looking online as well. If you're on the app, you can just use the reactions tab to raise your hand, or you can call into the 1-855 number and hit *9 to indicate. It's not unusual, especially if we have other topics of interest, that we get to those, and there aren't big lineups for our public input section. Sometimes they're full, sometimes they're not. I'm not seeing a lot of other hands poking up. Last chance in the room. No, we're okay. Okay, we'll come back then to the next item on the agenda, which is, again, skipping section 7 for the moment. We're going to deal with a couple of other issues first before we come back to it. So section 8. First have 8.1. This is an adoption of a zoning amendment. So this had first, second, and third reading. This is 2326 Oak Bay Avenue. Mr. Green, I understand not much introduction to make here, I don't think, but we're here for adoption after the... Oh, sorry. My apologies, Councillor Smart. You do have to recuse yourself on this matter. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to recuse myself from this item as I have a business relationship with the architect on the project.
Thank you for that. You can tell I over-rely on my notes, not on my memory. Go ahead, Mr. Green.
Now, good evening, Your Worship, members of council. Yes, as you rightly mentioned there, the council gave first, second and third reading to this zoning bylaw amendment on October the 10th. Following that, there was a number of conditions that needed to be addressed in a covenant, and that covenant has now been signed by both parties and registered as a charge on title, and so council can adopt this zoning bylaw this evening.
Great.
Just to mention, the applicant is also attending via Zoom, I believe. I see Peter Haneke is on the line, and Kim Coleman should also be online if there is any questions of the applicant.
Thank you. I don't anticipate a lot of questions as we've gone through this process to this completion point. I'm just probably looking at a motion, and we can take comments or questions at that point. If there's any, move to Councillor Green.
I'll move the staff recommendation as stated.
Thank you. Can we just actually read because it's a bylaw, if we can just read aloud that council adopt the zoning amendment bylaw? Go ahead.
I'll move that council adopt 2326 Oak Bay Avenue zoning amendment zoning bylaw number 4847, and that council approve development permit DP 000042 for a proposed 4-story 15-unit multifamily residential building with underground parking located at 2326 Oak Bay Avenue.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. There may have been one extra zero in there, but we'll catch it in the minutes. Any other discussion? I'm not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. And we just need a motion to receive as well.
Receipt.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. That was our only item that doesn't have public input. We can invite Councillor Smart back into the room. I'd ask if anybody from the public wishes to address council on that's online for 9.1. This is amendments to Oak Bay Public Sewer Bylaw that you can raise your hand at this time, and when we get to the public input portion, I will call on you at that time. People in the room, if anybody wishes to speak, I'll call on you in this as well. We have Mr. Rennick, who is here to provide an overview of these bylaws changes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Council, members of the public. The proposed amendments to the public sewer bylaw are partially in the interest of fulfilling prior council direction. Council had provided direction in July of last year around the Humber and Rutland sewer catchments that those owners receive sewer laterals at no cost. That does form part of the contract that this council offered the authority to award at last week's meeting. And so this is just formalizing in the bylaw that residents in those catchments do not have to pay. There are a couple of other changes that we are recommending. One is broadening the number of situations where we can offer discounts on sewer laterals to members of the public. Formerly, we had to be replacing the sidewalk along their project frontage in order to be able to offer this discount. We have proposed more flexible language where if the engineering department deems that there's a cost advantage to the district or to the owner, it empowers us to offer that discount, which should result in more property owners replacing their laterals and thus less groundwater getting into the sewer system, which benefits everyone because it results in a lower amount of groundwater that has to be treated that we ultimately all pay for through the CRD requisition. The final two pieces are allowing us to better recover the costs when we bring in a contractor to do trenchless replacement of sewer laterals and requiring an application fee if someone applies for a waiver from connecting to the system. So it's about 50% aligning the bylaw with prior direction and 50% some opportunistic changes that we thought if we're going to bring these other bylaw amendments, let's just try and do it all at once. So I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rennick. Are there any questions of Mr. Rennick? This time, Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mayor, through you to Mr. Rennick. Please, I just have one question about the proposal to increase the offer the discounts more widely. And how would you know how would an owner know that there would be a cost advantage to them in doing it at a certain point in time? So I don't quite understand the process and why that might be a trigger that would allow the discount.
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor. Typically in the past, what we've done is when a capital project is coming along, for example, Kings Road, where we are likely to be impacting people's laterals, we send a letter to every single property owner that says, we are doing a project, and if you apply within such and such a time frame, you will be able to take advantage of the 50% discount. We were only able to offer that in situations where we had to replace the sidewalk. We would like in future projects to expand the number of times we could offer the discount. For example, if we're going to bring in a contractor to do all of the work, we can typically get a better price on doing the laterals because of economies of scale. They've already brought in the large equipment, etc. And so we would like to be able on more capital projects to send out these letters. So the way that an owner would know that they could receive the discount is they would get a letter.
Councillor Watson? Good. Are there other questions for Mr. Rennick? Councillor Patterson?
Thank you, Mayor, and through you to staff. And just to follow up to the question that Councillor Watson put before you. So then with anticipating we will be replacing major segments of the district's infrastructure, then this would have quite a widespread application throughout the district. Is that the intent?
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, yes, that is the intent. We want to be able to get as many new laterals installed as possible. We want to encourage people to install new laterals whenever we can. And so making it easier to offer people that discount should increase the uptake that we get on lateral replacements.
Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And just a further follow-up, I think, that is, that's a significant change from what we have done in the past, and it is an opportunity. And I think that that's something that perhaps should be picked up as a broader communication piece so that residents know that it will be wider. I think that there are residents who feel that some of these opportunities are only offered because of the Uplands sewer separation project. And if our intent as a council is to have this over a wider area, I think I support staff's recommendation, but I see it as a positive move forward and positive uptake in it for all members of the community. So but it is important to communicate with the community what the intent is.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you, and through you to Mr. Rennick, thank you so much for the report, and particularly the recommendations on discounting costs for the laterals to the wider community. I think this is something, it's for me, it's been an equity issue for a long time, and I think we're 50% to full equity, so hopefully over the years, probably not in my lifetime, but that one of these days we will join the other 2/3 of the province that do it differently. But in the meantime, thank you for this report, and thank you for the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Smart?
Yeah, thank you. Just a question through you, Mayor, to Mr. Rennick. I'm just curious with regards to anybody that's sort of currently perhaps in the process of replacement or has just recently, when this will become effective, and if council could or consider it to be retroactive to a certain extent for those that may have just paid 100%. Could you elaborate on how many of these may have taken place just recently or in progress?
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, the only capital project that is currently in progress that involves replacement of laterals is the Dalhousie Sanitary Sewer Project. It does require replacement of the sidewalk, and so all of those owners would have received an opportunity to take on the discount. Anyone who has underdone work on their own accord because they were doing improvements on their property wouldn't have been eligible to for the discount before and won't be under the proposed bylaw.
Thank you. My last thing. A quick question I have is really actually not related to this bylaw, but it seems logical that we'd have a similar sort of clause for doing water main replacement in future. Is that something contemplated to our water bylaw for providing discounts if we're replacing a water main to do the laterals at the same time? Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, to yourself. There is no current provision in the water rates bylaw for offering a discount the way that there was for the laterals, and it is also in the district's interest to replace leaky water services, but they tend to be more obvious when they're leaky. So you could have a sanitary sewer that's been leaking for 20 years, letting groundwater in, and you would never know about it. But if there's a water service that's leaking, we can tell because it's creating a pothole, it's spraying water up out of the ground. So while it is important to replace leaky water services too, it's not quite the same kind of problem. They tend to be very obvious when they fail, and they cost us a little bit of money and lost revenue, but we fix them pretty quickly. It's not like a leaky lateral that's costing us money for decades without us knowing about it.
Thank you. But it would make sense to upgrade the laterals at the same time if we're doing a water main replacement, would it not? Or does it not have, do they not have the same kind of water, like end of life issues as other pipes?
We typically have been offering new replacements, putting in new meters, upsizing. A lot of the old water services are only 1/2 inch. We've been increasing the sizes as a part of the capital projects. It's a little bit of a different situation than the laterals.
I'm not going to belabor it since it's not part of this bylaw. I was just curious when I saw these changes, so thank you for that. I don't see other questions. I'm going to ask members of the public if they have any questions or comments on these bylaw changes. We don't usually get a lot of public input on our bylaw changes, I'm going to say that, but you're welcome to if anybody in the room wishes to speak to us. Okay,
Move receipt.
thank you. Moved and seconded. I see nobody online. I take that. All those in favor for receipt? Thank you. Approved.
And I'll move that bylaw number 4857, a bylaw to amend District of Oak Bay bylaw number 3891, public sewer bylaw 1996, be read a first and second times.
Moved and seconded. This is the opportunity for any debate, if there's any that people wish to make. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Go ahead.
And I'll move that bylaw 4857, a bylaw to amend District of Oak Bay bylaw 3891, public sewer bylaw 1996, be read a third time.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That will be coming back for consideration and adoption at our next meeting, which is in, I think, 2 weeks' time. So look forward to that. We move to item number 9.2, which is a development variance permit for 3561 Redwood, which I see the owner here. So I have Mr. Muller here to introduce.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. The district has received a development variance permit for the property located at 3561 Redwood Avenue. The applicant is seeking to receive a variance for covered parking, as they have discovered that their covered parking carport is located on the neighbor's property. The carport was built in January of 2000 and received final inspection of July of 2000. And the neighbors to on Pelly Place had discovered, after receiving a survey, that the carport was encroaching on their property by 40 centimeters, and they would like to rectify the legal encroachment. As there's no feasible space for rebuilding the carport, the applicant is now seeking a variance for the covered parking requirement. And they are, as you said, in the audience if they have any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muller. Are there any questions of staff or the applicant for members of council here? Let's see. I might just ask, if I can just have the applicant come forward. I just have one question. Mr. DeGroot, if you wish to come forward.
Mr. Mayor, council members, I do
Welcome.
not have any questions at the moment.
No, I have a question for you. There are two quick questions. Just to confirm it, just looking at the photos, it looks like any shifting of that space would require the removal of the tree there, because it's sort of sitting in the middle of the front of your property. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be correct.
Okay.
And there are more issues because if you're to move it somewhere else, in another spot, I would require creating a new driveway on the other side, and already a previous Board of Variance in 1998 and 9 said, look, that would be unreasonable, place it there. Unfortunately, when we constructed the carport, nobody thought that this was going to be over the property line. It is only 2 years ago when our neighbors had a pipe burst on their property and asked if they could use our water. We said certainly. And then they found out that 2 of the posts were respectively 35, 40 centimeters over. And we said, yeah, sure, we try and make it narrower. And then we looked at making it narrower, and you end up with something that's
It's well laid out in the report.
it's
Yeah.
useless.
Thank you, Mr. DeGroot.
So the only difference, if you remove the carpet, is that we'll get wet when it rains. We're going to get into the car.
Right. Fair enough. Thank you. I will share one little story here as well, which is that there is actually I won't say where it is, but a house was built right across a property line. It sort of built out over many years, and it ended up about 5 feet onto somebody else's property, and it still exists there today, with just an agreement between the two that the one owner can ask them to remove it at any time. So there may be the possibility. It sounds like you've explored that option, but if there's something you wish to keep, you may want to explore that. In the meantime, we're going to look at the application that you have in front of us here. So
Okay,
yeah,
Mr.
thank you.
Mayor and council members, our neighbor said they wanted us to remove the carport because it might hold up a sale if they were going to sell it. So
Okay, clear. All right, it's here in front of us. I don't, is there any members of any other questions from members, any from council? We have a couple of pieces of correspondence here already. Is there any members of the public who wish to address us on this variance application? This is a variance application at 3561 Redwood for removal of the requirement for covered parking on the site. I don't see a lineup at the microphone or online. Oh, please come forward. Yes.
This one.
And you have to just do the same process that we had before, just your name and municipality of residence.
Charlene Hooper, Oak Bay. I'm just curious how the carport got built without a survey in place.
We have no idea.
Is it an older structure? I didn't get from 2000, I guess?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm only asking because I've been through a whole lot that I won't go into tonight regarding a deck that was built 30 years ago, and I needed to provide a lot of information about it, which I didn't have. We've lived here a little over 6 years, so I'm not in any way opposing what's going on. I'm just curious of how that happened. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Answers I cannot give from this table, unfortunately. I'm guessing that they laid out the plans and it just got misread on site at the time it was built, but yeah, interesting question. All right, seeing no other members of the public speaking, back to this table. We have comments or motions. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Move receipt of the staff report, Your Worship.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed?
And Your Worship, I would move that council approve development variance permit DVP 00145 to reduce the number of parking stalls within a building for the property located at 3561 Redwood Avenue.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any further discussion on that? Not seeing any. I'll call it. Oh, Councillor Watson.
I just have would just want to make the comment that the motion as worded says to reduce the number of parking stalls, but it doesn't say by how many, and I wonder if we could add that for clarity. We're basically eliminating the requirement for stalls within the building, is that not correct?
It's the stalls within a building terminology, which is a covered parking spot. So it's just reducing the requirement for covered. Yeah, total number is still required. Yeah, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Your variance is granted. And you are welcome to stay for the rest of the evening if you wish. You are not required to. We have number 9.3, a development variance permit for 1400 Newport Avenue. Mr. Muller, you're back on deck.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. The district has received a development permit for the property located at 1400 Newport Avenue. The applicant is proposing the replacing of the balcony railings and fascia where necessary for the multifamily, multi-residential building located at 1400 Newport. As this building is located as what the OCP defines as a multi-unit residential development permit area, any significant changes to form and character would require a development permit to review the changes against the design guidelines listed in the OCP. The application was heard by the advisory design panel in November, at which time they noted that there was no architect involved in the project and signing off on plans, and they sent it back to staff and to the applicant to obtain an architect. At that point, the applicants received an architect's signed and sealed plans, and we had returned to ADP, at which time they reviewed the plans and provided the recommendation for approval. They're also on the Zoom. Ibrahim is in the Zoom room if you have any questions. Oh, and sorry, and the architect is also there in the audience too.
Very good. Thank you very much. Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to staff, I just wanted to follow up with the remaining question from the advisory design panel meeting with regards to whether fire separation was required in the soffit, and just some assurance of if that hasn't been received yet, that information that would be something that staff would be following up.
Mr. Muller.
Yes, thank you. So during the building permit phase, this is when they would review the requirement for any sort of fire separation, as well as the fire code and building code would applied to the building and whatever the work was being done.
Thank you. Any other questions from members of council to the applicant or to staff? Not seeing any. I'll go to any members of the public wish to talk to us about the changes at 1400 Newport. Wasn't anticipating a mad rush on this one either, but there we go. We'll turn back to council table then.
Move receipt of the staff report, Your Worship.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed?
And then, Your Worship, I would move that council approve development permit 000048 for the replacement of the balcony railings and fascia of the multifamily residential building located at 1400 Newport.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. That concludes our skipping forward. We're going to go back to section 7 now. Thank you, everybody, and thanks for sticking with us as we bounce around. We just thought those applications were reasonably straightforward and can probably be dealt with earlier than some of the more complicated items on the agenda. So thank you. I'll give people a chance to leave if they so wish to leave. And I'm going to move back to section, in my notes, 7.1. 7.1 is an item for information, but this has been a lot of time in the making. And I'm sorry that we are missing one of our staff because due to sickness today, so Mr. Rennick is on his own to present this information. With that, I will just welcome you, Mr. Rennick, to the meeting.
Thank you, Mayor. I also lost my friends. Sharing for everyone in the Zoom call. Okay, this is the Engineering Capital Works Plan 2024 presentation. The objective of this presentation is that it be received for information by council and also for members of the public so that they can see what our plans are for 2024 in terms of underground infrastructure, roads, and sidewalks. Just going to give a brief overview of what's going to be in this presentation. We are going to talk about what are the phases in project delivery, how does capital project delivery work, give an overview of our capital projects, tie it into our asset management and sustainable infrastructure replacement plan, and finally discuss what reports and studies the department has underway. So to begin with, these are the project phases, and each slide in the presentation is going to reference where in these phases each project is. So that starts with project initiation, which is defining what is the objective, what are we trying to do, what are we trying to solve. Next, we have procurement for a consultant, where we go out and find a qualified engineer to design the project. The design phase is where they actually design said project. The blue phase of tender, reviewing, and award is optional. In the case where Public Works will be building the project, that does not happen. Then we have the construction process, which is the long and expensive one. And finally, we have the post-construction phase, which is reporting on budgets and closing out the project with the consultant and the contractor. So this slide I'm not really going to repeat because I kind of just said it in words and I'm trying to keep to a timeline. Also wanted to touch on the different cost estimates that we talk about because we use a lot of terminology around the council table about Class A, Class B, Class C, and we haven't ever really defined those. So Class D is our least accurate. That's done at the early project scope at the beginning of the design phase, and that's accurate to within 30 to 50%. Once you have a preliminary design, you can do a Class C, which is accurate to within 20 to 30. On detailed design, you can do Class B, which is 15 to 20. And then at the end of the design phase, you have your Class A estimate, and that is accurate to within 5 to 10%. And that's probably as accurate as you will ever get because you are subject to market forces and inflation and all of those other fun things. So we wanted to briefly talk about capital project delivery. The expectation is that you get on your bike, I don't know why he's not wearing a helmet, we'll fix that, and you ride up a nice, gentle ramp to the checkered flag. In reality, there are some pits and chasms, and I think there's like some rain clouds in there. So what we try to do is minimize and mitigate the valleys and target and capitalize on the peaks. So what are the peaks? Timely delivery of material, early identification of conflicts, innovative designs, and consistent standards. The valleys, adverse weather, I guess that's why we had a rain cloud. Supply chain disruptions, unforeseen conditions, that could be running into rock where you didn't expect it, unmarked utilities, archaeological significance, etc. And of course, limited data, which we are often dealing with. So in order to balance those peaks and valleys, what we could do is we could have a comprehensive design phase where we take lots of time, try and figure out as much as we possibly can, which hopefully leads to overall lower costs and lower risks during construction. When we end up in a compressed design phase, we can often overlook those risks and then we just end up paying for them. And of course, there are some other elements to consider when timing a project. Number one is public engagement, which we find is almost always required for active transportation projects. Particularly, it's a requirement when you're applying for grants, and it also tends to be very visible, and so it's something that we always like to hear from members of the public on. It is a valuable process, but it does add time to project timelines. Grant applications, a number of our projects are grant supported, and this can have impacts on your timeline because you have to have certain aspects done in order to apply, and then you have to wait and hear, and you can't spend money until you know if you've gotten the grant or not. They also tend to have more complex reporting requirements. And then, of course, there is external resource constraints. If you try to go out to a construction tender late in the fall, you often find either nobody bids on it or their prices are very high because everyone is very busy. So there's a lot of things that we have to juggle when we are trying to time our projects so that we can have a fulsome design period and keep everyone informed and stay on top of these potential delays. So this is what a typical project timeline looks like for us. As you can see, the longest phases are design, which can take 4 to 6 months, and construction, which can take 4 to 8 months. And I will say that this is our typical, we do a project in 1 year, not applicable to things like Humber, which I wish would only be 4 to 8 months. But that just kind of gives an idea that of a typical project, you're looking at nearly 2 years from initiation to post-construction if everything goes perfectly to plan. And with that in mind, perfect plans, I am now going to introduce the projects that we will be working on this year. So we've broken this out by utility first, and then we'll get into the surface infrastructure. So we have 5 water capital projects this year, and I'm just going to step through them fairly quickly. Phase 2 of Oliver Street, which is from McNeil to Brighton. This is a continuation of the work that we did last year from Central to McNeil. The design is complete and the work will be done by Public Works, and we are expecting a May to August construction period. Next, we have Top Avenue. This is also a completed design, and it will be another Public Works job. It's upgrading a very small main on Top Avenue, and it will allow us to add a fire hydrant, which will be great because there's currently no fire hydrant on Top Avenue. Cadborough Bay and Thompson water main project. This has also been designed. This will be going out to tender in a few months, and so it will come back to this table for authority to award a contract. This is replacing an old leaky steel water main that has been an ongoing maintenance issue. There will be several phases of replacing this main on Cadborough Bay Road, and this is the first phase. So it's starting at the northern end, which is at Uplands Road. And McNeil Avenue utility upgrades. This is related to the McNeil Active Transportation Project that we will get into in a little bit more detail later on. One of the primary issues that's driving McNeil Avenue is that it has a small diameter water main that needs to be upgraded so that we can replace some leaky mains elsewhere in the system. So it's actually related to the Oliver project. It's basically upsizing a few of the transmission mains so that we can get rid of water main on Hampshire that has a very bad break history. Finally, we have the Uplands water mains on Ripon, Norfolk, and Exeter. These are being done concurrently with the Humber project. And there's various reasons why we're doing each one. Exeter has a break history, Norfolk is asbestos cement, and Ripon is too small. So those are kind of the three main reasons why we do water main projects all in one. And so this will be delivered by the contractor who will be delivering the Humber project. Moving on to the sanitary sewer projects, of which we have three. The first one is the Dalhousie sanitary sewer replacement, which has been ongoing since last summer and is intended to be completed by April. The original intent was that it would have been completed last year, but there were a number of unforeseen challenges that have led to an increased project duration. Next is Curry Road. This one is designed and should be going out to tender shortly. And this is replacing the sanitary sewer along the backside of Windsor Park, where we have a long history of backups due to the pipes being too small for the number of homes and multifamily buildings connected to them. And we have a small job on Florence Street that will improve some sewage flow routing and will allow us to abandon a 95-year-old sewer pipe on Foul Bay Road. This work was mostly done by the district in 1998, but they didn't get rid of the last piece of it from that laneway going down. So this will be a good project, and design is underway, and it will go to tender likely in the summer. Finally, we have these storm sewer projects, and there's only three of them, but the first one is kind of big. That is the Upland Sewer Separation Humber Catchment, which this council is very familiar with. It involves installing new storm main on half a dozen streets in the uplands to eliminate these separated sewers and allow us to meet the province's deadline of 2025 to have Humber Catchment separated. Aside from Humber Catchment, we also will be doing phase 1 of the storm sewer replacement on Estevan, which goes from Heron Street out to the water and also has a portion going up Lincoln Road. This is being driven by the fact that these storm mains on Estevan are too shallow and are prone to flooding. And the piece that goes up Lincoln Road to Burdick allows us to divert flow away from Thorpe Place, where it's in a pipe that is very small and very hard to maintain. And this will essentially allow us to construct a new outfall, which should alleviate flooding concerns, not only along Estevan, but upstream of that area too. So Musgrave, Thompson, Dufferin, it's a new outfall for that whole catchment. And the last storm project is Meadow Place, which is a small cul-de-sac off of Foul Bay Road, just south of Goldsmith, that has had significant maintenance and service issues associated with the pipe basically being so broken that we can't fix it anymore. So this one has been driven by Public Works maintenance demand. This is a pipe that would be very good to improve so that it works again. In terms of active transportation capital projects, we have two projects that we are working towards. The first one is phase 1 of McNeil Avenue traffic calming, which I will signal that it will be coming back to this table in a month or two when we hear back from the province on the active transportation grant program. And pending the outcome of that grant, there could be a discussion about what is the timeline on this project? Are there interim measures that could be taken? But we felt that it was probably more appropriate to have that discussion once we've heard back about the grant. The other active transportation project on the books this year was directed by council last summer, and that is the quick win projects on the Henderson Road Cycling Facility and the Haltane Estevan Cycling Facility. So design is underway on those two projects, and that's kind of the first build out of the refreshed active transportation strategy. So just tying things back into the asset management plan and the sustainable infrastructure replacement plan, Riley, can you move that little committee room window just because it's kind of blocking my slide? So we talk about percentage of sustainable annual output as 1% of the length of each utility. So this year for water mains, we're at 157% or 1.57% of the network. Sanitary sewer mains and storm sewer mains, we are not quite at the 1% level. And on road rehabilitation, we are slightly above 1%. We're at 1.17%. Just a very quick slide with some miscellaneous capital projects that we have underway. Most of these are quite small, and the ones that are listed as in progress were in last year's 5-year financial plan and have descriptions. And the ones that are pending approval will appear before this council in the new 5-year financial plan, and can be discussed at that time. And finally, we have the reports and studies. Most of these are ongoing, and they just help us prioritize projects and identify areas that are deficient and will inform future capital plans. That was a big blitz. I don't know if that was 10 minutes, but it felt like it.
A little more than 10 minutes, but we're okay.
Were you timing me?
Yes. I was going to call. I have your presentation. I can see if you're almost done, so I let you continue. It's all good. Thank you for that, Mr. Rennick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Are there questions? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Through you, thank you very much, Mr. Rennick. That we are aware of. Do we have a risk identification or management plan that can help us mitigate against those kinds of system failures? Can we identify ahead of time where failures might occur? And I know that's probably impossible in some ways, but I just wondered if there was any way of doing that so that we can prognosticate what might happen. Thank you.
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor. As you allude, it is very complicated to predict where exactly breaks will occur. We can look at our infrastructure in terms of risk level, what's a low risk, what's a medium risk, what's a high risk. But pipes that are high risk of failure, I could fill 10 presentations like this. And so the challenge is not just go out and fix all the high risk. It's prioritizing them, fitting them in with other work that needs to be done. That's the real challenge for us.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Appleton, then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Worship, and through you, staff. Value the information that's in this report, and I do appreciate sort of the heads up about the McNeil Avenue utility upgrade. So just to further on what Mr. Rennick had put forward, it seems to me, and I appreciate the mention of further information coming about the McNeil grant for phase 1, but just to confirm, the utility upgrades, irrespective of timing on grant or the nature of the grant, the utility upgrades would be a necessary first step before phase 1 that's also outlined in the report would be done, correct?
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, yes, that is correct. The phase 1 works involving permanent concrete bulges would be sitting over top of old deficient utilities that, frankly, it would be this council's prerogative, but we would not recommend installing new surface works on old utilities, knowing that the old utilities need to be replaced.
Thank you, Worship, and thanks for that. So do we have a sense of timeline on design work for the McNeil Avenue utility upgrades? Like, what would be it's maybe not undefined at this stage of the game, but what, I think right now it's basically sort of, it doesn't really specifically outline a date, but when would we be looking at the earliest start time for those upgrades?
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, there is a potential for construction to start on those utility upgrades in the fall of this year.
Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate that. So, and I appreciate what Mr. Rennick is saying about obviously avoiding installing significant above-ground infrastructure before the underground works are done. I guess, would the follow-up report that Mr. Rennick mentions about Phase 1 implementation also include plans or outlines for temporary installations to achieve the same traffic calming goals?
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, yes, absolutely. The staff report could bring back some temporary works and an idea of their cost for council's consideration.
Okay, so thank you very much. And just to confirm, Your Worship, does council need to direct that, or is staff already planning on including that?
Mr. Rennick?
Ms. Williams shook her head. You do not need to provide that direction. We will incorporate that.
For those at home, Ms. Williams is our Chief Administrative Officer, so go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just with respect to the active transportation projects that are already approved by council are obviously included here. It's my understanding that we're still expecting a more comprehensive update on active transportation implementation, potentially leading into the next budget. So I'm just taking this opportunity to confirm that the timing and the information included about those two active transportation projects in this report is not that. It does not constitute the update on active transportation that council is expecting.
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, that is correct. On the slide about reports and studies in progress, there was prioritization and implementation of active transportation plan. These two projects, Henderson and Haltane, jumped the queue. They're not included in the active transportation plan update. They get to go first.
Thank you very much. Just one final detail question here, Your Worship. Under the Henderson Haltane cycling facility layout, it does mention the design includes small intersection improvements, and I think council's discussion at the time for the Haltane Estevan facility included an intersection improvement at Haltane and Fowl Bay, and I just wanted to confirm that that was still included.
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, yes, that is one of the intersection improvements identified in that project.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. We go to Councillor Patterson and then Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff. Just backtracking a little bit, you did mention a couple of the projects being tendered and some being done by staff. So I'm wondering on the sanitary sewer replacements on Curry and Florence and the storm sewer replacements on Estevan and Meadow, are those being done in-house or are they being tendered?
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, all of those projects that you listed are intended to be tendered.
Thank you. And the other question I have about the report that you provided, and thank you for the report. I think that it's very helpful to see that we are actually making progress on the infrastructure as council desired. But when I am reading the report and I'm reading that the design drawings are complete, I'm reading that as detailed design drawings are complete to get to a Class B budget. Am I reading that correctly?
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, any of the projects that we say design is complete, those are 100% ready to construct. We could hand them to a builder tomorrow and they could build the job.
Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, and the other question I have is that because the marketplace is so active now and many of these projects are not yet tendered, could you just speak to the dilemma of tendering these later in the year and how that affects the the competitive bidding process and also the dilemma of procuring supplies for the projects.
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, the only real challenge of trying to procure contractors later in the year is if you have hard deadlines and tell them, you know, you're going out to tender in August and you say, well, this job has to be complete by December. That's when contractors tend to drive their prices up. There is a small concern that when you go to tender later in the year that contractors will be busy, they'll be booked up, but we would typically mitigate that by not imposing hard deadlines because with the exception of Humber Catchment, which had the deadline from the province, if some of these projects, if they have to take a pause for the winter weather and start again in the spring, and that ultimately ends up in better pricing, that's certainly something that we're willing to do.
Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you. And as a follow-up to that, then, if we take a pause, does that mean, I know on Dalhousie, there has been quite a gap in that project from start to ongoing completion of the project. I hear about it daily when I walk. I can see the visuals, so I understand the dilemma in it. But what impact would we delay the start of that entirely and not take a pause midstream, which is really quite disruptive and inconvenient for residents?
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, typically, I can't speak for everything that happened on Dalhousie. Typically, if we think a project is large enough that it's going to need to take place over multiple years, we break it up into phases. That was what we did with Windsor Road sanitary replacement. That's what we're doing with Oliver Water Main. We try and have discrete chunks so that if we take a pause, we're leaving a site that's mostly tidied up. So that's really our preference is we kind of have an innate sense of how much work can be done in a year. And that's why some of these projects in the report, such as Estevan, are only referred to as phase one because we don't think we could do much more on those projects in 2024. And so they'll have a phase two likely in 2025.
Right, Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you for allowing me to continue. I guess my concern is on the sanitary and storm sewers. We are doing lower than anticipated amounts of work in comparison to the Sustainable Infrastructure Replacement Plan, for which we're charging taxes already. So we engaged the residents in support in funding the project so that we could move forward, and yet we've had some barriers, I guess, in a number of ways to be able to, in fact, get up to the intended results of those projects. I'm just wondering if you can, you could articulate some of the problems that we're having in not being able to increase the output on those projects.
Mr. Rennick, it may be helpful. Looking at your chart here, it's about 7.5 kilometers of stormwater and sewer being replaced in 2024. It might be helpful to put in context where we were a couple of years ago and where we're trying to get to in that question as well.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I will say that these numbers in terms of how many meters are being replaced are indeed higher than they were last year or the year before. So we are certainly trending up. We have been very vocal with this council, myself, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robertson's predecessor, Mr. Haran, about the staff challenges associated with building out a program. This council has been very helpful in allowing us to go out and get new staff, for example, Mr. Mamura, and it just takes time, frankly. This is it's very complicated, as I alluded in my response to Councillor Green. Even just identifying which projects to do, in getting all of these condition assessments done, getting all of these plans done, it just is simply, we are trending in the direction. And as you can see on water mains, we're there, and we're headed there on the other utilities, and we're going as fast as we can.
Patterson?
Thank you, and thank you for that explanation. And please, if you interpret my remarks as being critical of staff, they're not critical of staff. It is a desire to, as recommended by staff, get to 3 to 5 times the output in order to reduce risks over a 10 to 15 year period, as opposed to a perhaps 30-year period. So. And hopefully, I would believe that over time and with greater experience and certainty, that hopefully then that will improve. My last question on this is, Mayor, is that there is absolutely nothing shown in the report for sidewalks, and sidewalks are something that I hear about frequently, and I'm wondering if staff can comment on what expectations residents can have about that.
Sure, Mr. Rennick, I think you had one follow-up to something that Councillor Patterson said the last time in the
Yes.
the sidewalks.
I just wanted to clarify, because we're talking about a lot of different numbers, that 3 to 5 times increase in capital output was not related to 1% per year. So it did not mean 3 to 5% per year. It meant a 3 to 5 times increase on what we were doing at the time, which was maybe 0.4, 0.5% per year. So really the ceiling of that is 1.5 to 2.5% per year, just so that we're clear. We cannot do 5% per year. That would be crazy. With respect to sidewalk replacement, on the slide of miscellaneous capital projects under pending approval was a sidewalk replacement program. That is something that we are approaching council next month as a new capital ask. And that is dedicated funding specifically to replacing sidewalks and only sidewalks. And so that will be available for council to deliberate as part of the financial plan.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Rennick.
That concludes my question.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I have Councillor Braithwaite next.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this report. You've kind of touched a little bit on some of the stuff that I wanted to talk about, which is that you have a very small and mighty department that has done yeoman's work as far as this goes. Over the years that I've been on council, this is such a great direction for us to be going from what I've seen in the past, so thank you for that. One of my questions comes around the risks, and you talked about balancing the peaks and the valleys and the risks and what some of the risks could be. And I want to just see if you could perhaps give me an idea of what happens if something like, for example, the break on Estevan and Beach that happened recently. How does that throw a wrench in the work that's on the table right now? So if something big like that came along, how does that push some of those jobs to one side? Because obviously there's some things that would have to be taken care of right away. And if you can answer that in some way, that would be great.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. It may be worthwhile for you, Mr. Rennick, as well, just to touch on, because I think it also goes a bit to the heart of like what is our optimal mix of staff versus contract, and why we keep both around.
Absolutely. So the reason why we do a mix of staff versus contract is because our staff have certifications that they need to keep up. They need to keep up their experience doing large-scale replacements in case there is an emergency, an urgent break. They need to be able to respond to it. We try to load up their agenda for the year with a number of projects that they can do, accepting that they will likely get sidetracked dealing with some other projects. We certainly spent a bit of time this year on Oliver Water Main because the water main construction crew would work for a week on Oliver and then go deal with a break and then work for a week on Oliver, and et cetera, et cetera. The risk on contractor-led projects, if you have a break, if you have a utility strike, et cetera, is that essentially the contractor cannot work anymore and you're paying them to not work. And there's different arrangements under the contract, but typically what they'll do is they'll take as many unessential staff away from site as possible, but you're still paying rental on their fences, their site trailer, any equipment that they have to leave behind. And so those risks can end up delaying projects and also costing us money.
Anything else, Councillor? Councillor Watson?
Thank you, Mayor. And through you to Mr. Rennick, please. I don't want to get down into the weeds of the operation, but I am curious about the management of what is becoming a larger and larger capital works program across many different utility types. And I just wondered if you could comment on how the sort of professional design staff allocation works across the project types, and what the maximum is that any one professional staff in your group can actually take on and move through the process, given that if they have a portfolio, the projects may be in different phases, but what's the sort of capacity per professional managing one of these projects?
Mr. Rennick?
That is a terrific question, and thank you for asking it. And it does really depend on the project phase. I would say that each of my staff who are project managing projects in this slide probably each have 4 or 5 projects that they are looking after themselves. And there's ebb and flow on that. You can look after more projects in design at one time than you can construction. Typically, your limit on projects that are in active construction is 1 or 2, depending on their complexity. And so it is a big task for myself and Mr. Robertson to make sure that we've assigned the right projects to the right people. And sometimes one staff member will look after a project during one phase, and then we'll realize that that person's plate's a little full and we have to shift priorities around. So it really is an ongoing challenge in work planning what the department does. And that's just our capital works. That's not, all the other things that we do.
Thank you, Mr. Rennick. That's really helpful for me and for council, I'm sure, too, and also for our public, because we know we've got a big lot of work in front of us, and it does have to be balanced out by what our staff capacity is in order to manage it well and make sure that we do get the best return on our investment. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. I've just got one quick question. This is a very useful information. It's a point in time. Is there, can you just share with us what the plans are for providing this information to the public on an ongoing basis? So if people are, see a bunch of backhoes lining up at the end of the street and maybe they threw out the notification letters, they have a place to go and see what the status is of these projects. Are we planning anything in there for allowing people to have direct access to some of the project information? Mr. Rennick, through me to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the new staff members that this council approved the hiring of was an additional staff member in the communications department. And part of that staff member's work is greater public communication on capital projects. On our district website, each capital project has a project page, which are periodically updated. And my hope is that those periodic updates will become more frequent and less periodic. We will also host this presentation on the website, and we are discussing some other techniques and ways that we can make this information more readily available to members of the public.
Thank you, that's great. This is for information only, so but we still got some time. Go ahead, Councillor Smart, before we move on.
Thank you. Through Mayor, I just wanted to ask a few clarifying questions, and this was so helpful, the report, and just having a snapshot, really interesting. With regards to your 2024 asset management summary page, when it says to be determined for the cycling facilities, I just wondered if you could elaborate if that was because council has yet to see the implementation plan and we don't know yet the scale of that, or is there potentially a chance that it's foreseen that there might not be any new cycling facilities this year? I wonder if you could clarify.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to council. The reason that it's shown as to be determined is because it's still pending council authorization on the active transportation strategy. However, what we could have done is we could have included the length for Henderson Haltane, which were already directed by council. We didn't, and I'm sorry, but it's not my intent to communicate that 0 was an option for cycling facilities.
Thank you, Mr. Rennick. And Councillor Smart, my apologies. I thought we were in the second time speakers. You hadn't spoken yet, so please take your fullness of time.
Thank you. I will try to be quick, but I do have a few questions through you, Mayor, to Mr. Rennick. With regards to the quick wins, when we approved that in July, you know, the phrase, "we can get them done this year" came out. And I'm wondering if you can just touch on the timeline for when those quick wins will be completed, your best guess, and if there has been a delay. Thank you.
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, I would have to double check the resolution that was passed by council. My understanding, my recollection was that the intent was to have these designs prepared for the September 2024 intake for the BC Active Transportation Design Grant. But I would have to look into that.
Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. That's really helpful information because it wasn't at all my recollection. So if that is the case and council potentially wants to give direction to not go ahead with, for instance, like the Henderson path, which is not one of our priority areas and was only really approved because it could happen so fast. I'm just wondering, will there be a touch point at that? When will we see this implementation strategy that council can comment on to look at what our strategy is going forward?
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, we do not have the exact date yet for when we are bringing the implementation strategy. I believe that we are targeting one of the financial plan meetings in March or potentially a council meeting separate from the financial plan meetings. That's something that I would have to double check with Mr. Robertson. I'm sorry, I don't have that at my fingertips.
But it is shortly, not in a year's time. Thank you. Councillor Smart?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to Mr. Rennick, I wondered if you could give an update on the Dalhousie street trees. As you recall, the residents of that area had brought up wanting a complete street climate-friendly approach, and there was a compromise proposed by Parks in which trees could be kind of fit in between curb and sidewalk, and I just wanted to know what the status of that was. Thank you.
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, I apologize. I do not have that information at my fingertips. I will need to speak with Mr. Hidlay, and I can provide a response at a later time.
Asking all the hard ones tonight.
Well, it's a very good report. Thank you. Through you again, Mayor, to Mr. Rennick. With the Cadboro Bay and Thompson water main project overlapping with one of the new cycling corridors in the active transportation plan, I'm wondering if you foresee any synergies to that work being done and looking at that particular cycling corridor.
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, yes, there is a potential synergy there. Council at this point in time has not endorsed a vision for the Cadboro Bay bike lane because the active transportation strategy refresh has not been brought yet. However, we are very much aware that Cadboro Bay Road is in the active transportation and is a priority project. So the short answer is yes, we will make sure that those two ideas get married up.
Councillor Smart?
Thank you. Just one remaining question then. Just with regards to the public engagement comment around active transportation, could you elaborate, Mr. Rennick, a little bit more on, for an example with McNeil, what that public engagement strategy has been or will be? And that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, the public engagement on McNeil consisted of a letter campaign to residents who lived on McNeil and the adjacent streets. We also had discussion at Committee of the Whole. I believe the first time was in 2021. We did not do an open house per se on that one, but we are always evolving our public engagement strategy, and that's something that could be done on projects in the future, or we could do what we did on McNeil, which is a mail out to the residents. There's lots of different ways for us to do the public engagement, and that's typically something that I would look to our corporate communications team on for what is the best approach on a given project.
Is that anything else, Councillor Smart?
Well, okay, one very last thing. Through you, Mayor, to Mr. Rennick, if with the active transportation implementation strategy, should council desire to see that ahead of financial planning as much as possible, would a motion be helpful towards that, or is it maybe not complete and it will just come when it possibly can come?
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, it is not complete, and it is actively being worked on, and it will come as soon as it can come.
Very good. Thank you very much. There's no recommendation here other than just receipt of the report at this time, so I'll take a motion for that, and I'll also just then reach out, thank you, moved and seconded for receipt. I'm going to remind any members of the public who wish to address us on this portion, you're welcome to do so at this time, either online, you can raise your hand, or if you're in the room and you want to talk to council about this, you're welcome to do so. And I'll call the question on the receipt of the report. Actually, no, that concludes our discussion on this. We have no other motions. Well, before I call the question on that, anybody from the members in the audience wish to talk to us about the fulsome update on capital projects? Not seeing any, I don't see any online, so I'll come back to this table. Any other discussion before I call the question? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. Mr. Rennick, thank you very much. It's good to get it's really our first meaningful, substantive update on all the projects that have been sort of being worked on in that scale up, so it's exciting to see. Moving to the last, not quite the last item on the agenda, but last item of this section, which is 7.2, which is the McNeil Traffic Calming Phase 2 update. I think most people in the audience are probably here to hear on this one. Mr. Rennick, I'll hand this over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report is following on to some council direction that was provided to staff on October the 10th. At that meeting, council had directed staff to update the cost estimate for phase 2 of the project to a Class B estimate and to consider alternative options such as sidewalk widening or a multi-user pathway. As I mentioned in the previous presentation, a Class B estimate requires a fairly detailed design, and it was not explained to council at the time what it would have entailed to advance the various options to a Class B estimate, and I apologize for that. What we are recommending at this time is that council direct staff to go forward with an option that essentially widens the road, advance that to a more detailed design, and provide a more detailed cost estimate. And the reason that staff is recommending the option that widens the road is, as was initially presented at June 2022 Committee of the Whole, McNeil Avenue is a collector road as per the OCP, but it does not meet the width standard for a collector under Oak Bay bylaws. It's very challenging to provide amenities to all road users in approximately 8.4 meters of asphalt. And so the recommendation that staff is bringing forward is that the asphalt be widened in the section between Foul Bay Road and Falkland. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you for that. And so procedurally here for everybody who wants to speak to us, we're just going to have a few questions from council, and then we'll get to input from the public. So we'll try and get to the members of the public reasonably quickly. I did just want to make a little preamble on this one because we've had so much correspondence on it, and there's lots of terminology there that we don't usually see, certainly not in our reports, about devolution and diversion and changing of status on the local road. And I guess I just want to put this in the framework so we kind of have this conversation within this framework that this project started, I think you noted there, in 2021, with really the primary objective of helping people on bikes move more smoothly and more safely along McNeil, where there's 2 schools and links to downtown, and finding ways of keeping traffic to the speed limits through better road design. And because this is and remains the east-west collector road for South Oak Bay, although it does kind of terminate and get scattered at Foul Bay Road, I think if done well, we've talked about this as using, more attractive plantings and narrower crosswalk openings and other design tools, because right now it's being slowed down by side mirrors on the parked cars. That seems to be causing a lot of damage for everybody. In fact, what raised this to our attention, I think, most prominently in the first place. And as noted, there's going to be likely, the phase 1 of that is likely to be delayed to allow for the underground work. And today's really, the last section is probably the area with the most current conflict in terms of cycling, which is that last westernmost section, which is between Falkland and Foul Bay Road. And I just point out to people here, I think it's fairly obvious, but between the narrowness and the steepness, you tend to get conflict where the speeds vary the most. And so what we found is that, of course, bikes cycling up the hill there go slow, and then the cars going up the hill are trying to drive at the speed limit, and there's a natural conflict there. So hence the conversation today is to kind of how we're going to deal with that. And so we're looking at budget, we're looking at design, we're looking at all aspects of that to get there. None of these changes are, just for the record, intended to change, as you noted, Mr. Rennick. This remains a collector road for the community. I think that was some information that was floating around, and the intention here is not to divert the traffic onto any of the side roads. I think what we're trying to do, find a path here is that makes it a little bit safer for everybody, but keeps allows for the traffic to flow in a reasonable and smooth way. So just want to put that out there as a context for what we're trying to do. But within that context, there's lots of good ideas, and we've had some fantastic correspondence on this, I have to say, some really thoughtful and interesting ideas brought forward. So I look forward to having that conversation. We do start with questions, though, so that little preamble was unusual, but we don't usually have this much correspondence, so I thought it might be a bit helpful for people here and online. Councillor Smart, questions?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mr. Rennick. I guess my first question is just if you could give me an overview, and I appreciate so much with the last report you giving us like real insight into the department. Could you just describe for us what expertise we have on active transportation design internally, and what experts we have utilized in active transportation so far as consultants, just to give us sort of a basis of understanding where some of this direction is coming from. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Reddick?
Through you, Mayor, we have 3 professional engineers on staff, one of whom is primarily a transportation engineer by academic focus. Transportation, not specifically active transportation, but all road users. So that's the in-house capability. This project design was undertaken by a consulting group called Watt Consulting. Watt is very well known in active transportation network planning in Victoria, Kelowna, Calgary. So we have our own in-house expertise, and then we have also gone out to a very well-known transportation engineering firm.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Rennick, for that. And then just to elaborate then, of all the different options that we could look at this corner then, was Watts Consulting recommending this option in the report? Thank you.
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, originally in June 2022 Committee of the Whole, there was a report brought that had options that only considered the existing width of the road. And the reason for that is that June 22 report was looking at doing something relatively low cost. However, there were certainly trade-offs. And I had identified at the time that the preferred option of the 3.35 meter wide shared driving lane on the south side with the 1.7 to 1.9 meter wide buffered bike lane would have allowed no on-street parking at all on McNeil between Victoria and Foul Bay Road. Council directed staff at the time to explore alternative options that would still allow parking, but would also allow greater safety for cyclists. That was where we landed on widening the road. In terms of whether Watt tells us that that is the absolute best thing to do, that's not really what consulting engineers do. They typically would raise concerns if we were doing something that was unsafe or reckless, but ultimately they recognize this is what your community wants, or this is one alternative that your community wants, and here's a design that delivers what your community wants.
Councillor Smart?
Thank you. Through Mayor to Mr. Rennick, I guess my one last question is, because I am not a traffic engineer, is just I don't, I guess, conceptually understand how making the road wider is going to make it safer for a cyclist when, like, my limited understanding of that is that cars would potentially go faster. And so I'm just trying to understand as a cyclist, say, heading west and wanting to say turn left, how making the road wider is going to make it safer for me. If you could describe that, thank you.
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, the road right now is frankly too narrow. And the only way that it's safe to pass along that road is when there's no cars parked on it. If you drive in South Oak Bay, you will periodically have the experience where there's two cars parked directly opposite each other, and it creates a one-lane road. And allowing the widened space so that cyclists going up the hill have their own dedicated space, that they're not sharing with a parked car, that they're not sharing with a traveling vehicle, that is how we make a safer experience for cyclists.
Councillor Smart?
Yeah, thank you for the indulgence. Just without pictures, I just need to understand. And so through you, Mr. Rennick, at what point when I'm over on the right-hand side in this potential cycling lane, am I able, while I'm going uphill slowly, to cross over to turn left? Is there going to be a bike box? Like, how is this all going to work? I guess I just don't understand it without a drawing.
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, the actual intersection is within City of Victoria, and the council provided direction at past meetings that we work with City of Victoria on an intersection design. I have been in conversation with my counterparts in City of Victoria, and whether it's a bike box, whether it's elephant's feet, there are options that we can discuss with City of Victoria. Certainly a bike box would be an elegant solution. However, bike boxes are only paint. So there is a lot of discussion to be had between us and City of Victoria there.
Thank you, Councillor Smart. Are there other questions of staff at this time? Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff. The report makes mention of minimum road standards for collector roads, like width standards for collector roads. I'm just curious where the bylaw specification is for that, because I don't see it in the streets and traffic bylaw, and obviously the OCP doesn't provide detail of that nature. So where does that land?
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, that is in Schedule A of the Subdivision and Development Bylaw.
Totally rational. Good job.
It kind of is, because the Local Government Act says that governments can, by bylaw, impose minimum standards on the widths and alignments of highways. And so that is why it is in the subdivision bylaw.
Interesting. Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate the information, because I would not have gone looking for it there, so I appreciate that. I'm just wondering about the aspect. I mean, there's some very positive suggested designs laid out in the report, but it does bring me pause that it's not laid out with graphics and with a graphic and a visual that we can present to members of the public for their consideration and for council's review. So I understand that there's some pretty significant limitations on accessing the appropriate resources or the appropriate consultant report to getting those renderings done or to getting those drawings done. But just in the current situation, I understand we don't really have very many options, but I'd just like to confirm that there's no way to receive such renderings for this particular project. And also, in the future, for these types of things, given I understand that the availability of consultants is fairly limited, how do we provide capacity, given that we seek to build out our active transportation network? How do we access the capacity in order to be able to avoid getting stuck without a rendering in the future?
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, I suppose that's an argument to be made for not putting all of your eggs in one basket. The decision was made not to go back to Watt Consulting for renderings, because Watt Consulting is also engaged on the active transportation strategy, which, as I alluded to in a prior comment, we are working on as fast as we can. It was a decision that was made by staff to not essentially reallocate what they're working on. In terms of how do we avoid this problem in the future, we are engaging other consultants on other projects. We undertake competitive processes, and we try to stay ahead of council timelines. I would say that bringing this report forward without renderings was just in the interest of bringing it forward in a timely manner. And I take the comment that it is difficult without the renderings, and I do apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Rennick. Councillor Appleton, anything else? Other questions of staff at this time? If not, I'll go to the public for comment and questions. I just have one question before we do go to the public then, and that is just timing-wise so we're talking about phase 2 specifically here. If direction is given here on B, that the detailed design and Class B estimate to move forward with, that then would create a detailed design to come back to council and for the public to look at. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor, yes. The additional construction costs associated with the option B, we likely suspect would be spent in 2025. And so there would be time for further consideration and discussion.
So the other question I have on this one is active transportation grants are one of the few that sort of often provide a pretty substantial portion of projects covered. And I'm curious on this one if is the intention of this one to have the detailed drawings done in time for grant intake this year for 2025's project?
Yes, absolutely. And that is part of the timeliness of seeking direction tonight to allow us to move on that timeline so that we have shovel-ready designs by the fall, which is when the intake comes in for next year.
Yeah, thank you for that. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks, Mayor. Through you to Mr. Rennick. What you just were talking about just kind of brought something else up in my mind. So for the option B, how much would it be for the detailed drawings? And I thought I just heard you say that the company that we would use for those detailed drawings is doing 3 other projects, and so doesn't have the time to do the detailed drawings for this particular project.
Mr. Rennick?
We have a couple of options there. It could be done by Watt Consulting, or because we have to do a utility project, we're going to be going out for a civil contractor to design the utility designs, and that civil contractor could design the road widening. In terms of what do I think that it will cost to do the design for the road widening, I would say approximately $25,000 to $30,000.
And then I guess my next question then would be, is there a possibility to do only a portion of the road widening for the uphill portion of McNeil?
To be clear, that is the only portion of road widening that we are recommending.
For the record, is that from Victoria or from Falkland to Foul Bay?
I will have to double check the map. There's a bus stop. I think it's halfway between Victoria and Falkland where it starts, because it starts after the bus stop.
Again, some of those details would be helpful, I think, and how much they impact the costs. Okay, thank you for that. I'm just going to go to the public now because I want to make sure we have people. We've been very patient for an hour and a half here, waiting for the chance to speak. So, assuming members in the audience are here to speak to council, someone has to be first. So you can come forward and address council. And I'll invite people, those of you who are online, if you're on the Zoom app, you can just raise your hand within the app using the reactions tab. But if you're interested, if you're watching the live stream on YouTube and you want to call us, you can call the 1-855 number that's on the agenda package, enter the ID code, and you use *9, that's *9, not #9, but *9 to raise your hand, and we'll see you in the application here to see who's called in. Are there members of the public who would like to come and talk to council? Mr. Teddy, someone has to break the ice, so why don't you come forward?
I might be an outlier here. Tim Taddy, Oak Bay. Mr. Rennick, thank you for your engineering report and for that. Mr. Mayor, at the last council meeting when council fortunately approved the 24-hour Henderson bike lane, you mentioned that you saw consistency in making it 24 hours, 24/7, but you didn't see it increasing safety. And I would agree with you. That was a lightning rod for the community when council rejected it earlier. And I think it highlights the need for safe, active transportation for all ages and abilities. I personally really appreciate the work council's doing. I think it's very unfortunate that grants make up most of the money that goes to these projects. One of the reasons we're here today, and there's so much discord about active transportation, is because Oak Bay missed the opportunity to make incremental changes along the way over the last 12 years. My only point on option B is that I'm very concerned about the east flow of a shared lane. I know there's going to have to be compromises. At the very least, I travel that road a lot. You can't take kids down there from Richardson down on a bike. The speed's too fast. It needs to be 30. If it's going to be shared, it needs to be 30K. There needs to be signs posted and on the road indicating shared road. So I'm hoping the design does that, because the bike lane going west will provide a good amount of protection, better than we have now. But the traffic, believe me, I've been on many shared bike lanes. The one coming out of Uplands down Cadboro Bay, cars will try and squeeze right by you, even with kids. So unless that's properly signed and properly enforced, it won't be safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tidey, for your comments. Anybody else from the public wish to talk to us this evening? Please come forward. We try and be friendly here, so it's not be too intimidating. Just the same process before. Just state your name, municipality, residence. I know it seems redundant if you've spoken already, but we just have to have it.
Okay, Charlene Hooper, Oak Bay. Firstly, if I could just clarify, not knowing there was a report or read a report, when we're talking about the bike lane on McNeil, does it go from Foul Bay to where? Where does it go?
Thank you for the question. I'll turn it to Mr. Rennick at this point.
Thank you, Mayor. The intention was to create traffic calming on the entire length of McNeil from Transit to Foul Bay Road. Past Transit, it kind of peters out into nothing. What council is being asked to deliberate on tonight is a separated bike lane that would specifically go from Falkland to Foul Bay Road. And I did check, that's where the bus stop is, it's at Falkland. So that's the steep uphill section. Were the road to be widened, we would be able to have a separated bike lane on that uphill section only. The rest of it would be Sharrows.
Okay, and can I ask what other traffic calming things that we're thinking about?
Sure, Mr. Rennick. This would be really referring probably to you're talking about east of Falkland area, correct? Down to
Yes,
towards Transit.
yeah.
Okay, sure.
The phase one traffic calming design, so between Falkland and Transit, called for curb extensions at the intersections. So that brings the curb more out into the road and shortens the crossing distance for pedestrians. And also some mid-block curb extensions, basically to narrow the roadway and lower vehicle speeds.
Okay, great.
It should also point out the crosswalk as well. The crosswalk has a slight elevation to it as well, so that there's a bit more evenness for accessibility and for visibility. So there's not quite a speed hump, but it has some elevation change.
Okay, and this might not be related to what has been discussed so far, but I'm curious to know if Windsor Road has been considered for bike lane.
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, the Windsor Road was not identified in the active transportation program as a priority route. The problem with Windsor Road is that it doesn't connect to Foul Bay Road on the western end. It just kind of peters off into a little cul-de-sac.
Right. So I guess my comments are, I live on McNeil, near the corner of Transit. I would say over the past couple of years, there has been a substantial increase in traffic, not only residential vehicles. I would say it would also be everything related to construction. So there's, large trucks coming with all kinds of materials had kind of bellow down the road. But it's also an increase of families I'm noticing out, and that's including children of all ages, a lot more bikes, but scooters, electric scooters, you know, everything. A lot of people walking, they're walking with their walking sticks, or going out with their other type of scooters. There's just a lot of activity. And I would say that really a bike, if we're considering a bike lane, maybe in the long term, we should be looking at extending that bike lane down all of McNeil from Foul Bay to Transit at least, and linking in somehow to the circle around Windsor Park. Just saying what I see from the children coming home from school, there's a huge amount of kids on bikes and walking that go up Monterey, and that should be considered because they're going all the way down past Willow School, because I drive down that way and I come back and I see where that traffic is going. And so that could be the connection in the future for Windsor Road, which just makes so much sense. It's wide, it wouldn't have a huge impact. I'm in full favor of everything that we could do with the bike lanes, and I think what you're discussing of having some sort of separation, I would say more if there was a barrier, it would even be all the better than just having the lines. And I can also see that it probably would not be popular for a lot of people that would not be able to park on one side of the road. But if there is parking available, at least on one side, maybe you can't park directly in front of your home, but you can park on the other side. And you can put that bike lane in front of my house. It's on the south side of the road, but I mean, I'm just saying, I think it's really important. Separation with bikes and vehicles is really the biggest safety that we can provide.
Thank you, Ms. Hooper.
And thank you for the report.
Thank you. Strike a point. If anybody else wishes to come forward, please do so now. I think the comparison between Windsor and McNeil is kind of a funny one, because the Windsor is such a nice wide road. We have lots of room to do stuff on it, and it doesn't go anywhere. And then we have Windsor, which is a perfect collector road, but it doesn't have to. Please come forward. Yeah. I was just filling in the time as you walked forward. So if you just do the same process, just your name and municipality of residence, and you have up to 3 minutes to address us, ask questions, comments, anything you want.
Thank you. Maggie Knight, Oak Bay. I live down by Lafayette Park, and I bike along Victoria and turn left up McNeil over to get to the Richardson bike lane pretty much every day. I was happy to be at council back in July when I was 38-week pregnant, and that baby is now 7 months old and goes with me on the cargo bike over that McNeil Hill pretty much every day. And my kid is, as we've heard, far from the only kid there. We see lots of kids all the time. We've got folks going, as you know, to many schools, but we see, St. Michael's, Glenland, Norfolk, Monterey, and Margaret Jenkins as well. Plus, of course, all of those of us who are trying to get to whatever daycare or preschool spot we've managed to find in this city, which is a challenge, as we know. Unfortunately, when I talk to other parents, a lot of them are ruling out biking altogether because they don't feel like they can get out safely to the infrastructure that does exist just across Foul Bay in Victoria. Our young family doesn't have a car, and so this means that our tenants, who are two care workers, who, as we know, we desperately need in our city and our community, they have the only car that regularly hangs out on our property. And so, as we know, when we exist in active transportation infrastructure, we can densify without creating the parking headaches that everybody is concerned about. And that's, that's what makes it possible for families like mine to stay car-free. At the moment, while that little stretch of McNeil, especially going up the hill, is often the most stressful part of my 30-minute preschool drop-off bike route, because it's the only section that isn't actually designed for bikes, I can manage more or less because I'm an adult and I'm willing to take the lane and willing to hold my ground against drivers that are trying to squish me. I'm sorry, no drivers are trying to squish me, but they do pass very quickly, and there is often a slalom effect created by where the parked cars happen to be, and everybody's in a rush, and everyone is annoyed that I'm not going as fast as they want me to, and there's nowhere for me to go. So the proposed solution is, not perfect. It's also 2 blocks of actual bike lane, which is not going to end the universe, I would assume, nor solve the universe. And we need a solution that's, shares fairly. And I think we're a long way from that still, but it would be a good first step. As we know, change is hard and there will always be opponents. But I think there's an opportunity to start really making those generational investments in change that allow for the shift towards active transportation. We know our kids today are growing up with a lot of mental health issues. We know that there are health issues related to not exercising enough. There are a lot of logistical and cost concerns around needing to drive and that being the only viable option. Transit to the South Oak Bay is not frequent or reliable at this point, unfortunately. And so this really offers an opportunity of a way that local governments can act to help our kids grow up more healthy, more independent, and of course to act on climate change, which we are growing up with a tremendous amount of anxiety around. I would, and speaking to what Councillor Smart was speaking about, I would hope that a significant amount of care could be taken to the design, or to talking to the City of Victoria about the design of that Foul Bay and McNeil intersection. It's consistently chaos. People wave each other through, lots of people are turning. And so depending how that could be, I certainly have concerns about coming up in the bike lane and being blocked from view by the car next to me and not being able to see, and others not being able to see me. So a bike box or something similar would be helpful. If it's going to be elephant's feet, please do a lot of education because people don't understand elephant's feet, especially when they're paired with 4-way stops, which make it very confusing who has the right of way. I think that's all I have time for, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. McKnight. Ms. Knight, sorry. Anybody else wish to come forward and speak to council? We only have the one window of opportunity here, so if anybody wants to talk to us, this is your chance. This is the nice thing about having people in the room. You can kind of read the eyes, like, I think I want to go up, but I'm not sure, so give an extra bit moment of time.
That's because a neighbour of mine actually has done a lot of work on this already.
Can I just get your name and municipality of residence, and then you're welcome to, you have about 3 minutes.
I'm Sylvia Bradley, and I live at the bottom of West Down Road, which is a cul-de-sac.
Welcome.
And of course, I look at this tree all the time. Now this, I didn't realize was going to be a problem, except that somebody's now going to try and build a house there. And
Are you here to speak to the McNeil Lane? Are you here to speak to the McNeil Street bike pathways, or just to just an item of interest?
There is no, like I'm on West Down, which is a cul-de-sac.
So I'm going to ask, this is a time to speak to the item on the agenda that we're on right now, which is the McNeil bike path portion. I'm just going to ask though, because if you are you here for something on the agenda, or is it just a point of general interest to you?
Well, it was a point because my neighbour has put a lot of work into coming up with something that, she shared it all with us. And I'm just a little bit worried about...
Is it related to the Neil Street crossing, perhaps, on East Down? Is it related to the Neil Street crossing on East Down or something? I'm just kind of curious what you... If it's something that's not urgent, it's something of interest to council, I might suggest you can just reach out through my office and talk to me, and we can...
Yes, I was thinking that as I was sitting there, actually.
If it's not urgent, if it's something that you wanted to raise to our attention, but it's just, this section is reserved really for comments on the item that we're on right now, which is the McNeil Street piece.
And I guess it would be, I'd have to talk to somebody on group. And also because it's an application for variances.
Okay, so we wouldn't be here tonight, no.
No.
So, yeah.
And
So if you want to reach out, you can reach out to the main, just call into the main desk and probably talk to staff first because there is, they can let you know about when, because we actually do have a chance to come and talk to us about variances.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because the neighbour who did this really worked hard, and
Yeah, no, we will definitely provide opportunity for comment. That's
yeah,
part of our process,
she's
but
not very healthy right now.
no worries.
So that's
Well,
why.
thanks for coming here anyway, and we'll deal with it at a future meeting when that comes
Well,
to
I
us.
found it very interesting, I have to say. Having lived and taught, Bay for many, many years. It was good to see some people here.
Yeah, well, thank you. And,
bit
and we
younger
will, I'm
than
sure
I
we'll see you
thought.
again when that comes back. So thank you for that.
Anyway, so thank you.
Always,
I didn't know how to do that.
it's okay. You probably figured out the system by now. The microphone's already on. Just name a municipality of residence.
Thank you, Mayor. My name is Dan Mooney. I'm a new resident. My wife and I are new residents to Oak Bay. I just wanted to speak in support of the staff recommendation to pursue option B. I also think respecting the road street classification and upgrading a substandard collector road is an excellent opportunity to create a true multimodal, safe collector road. And in terms of widening the road, and I should, just as a bit of background, I'm not a transportation engineer, but I'm an applied science technologist with 41 years, retired, with 41 years of transportation experience in the Lower Mainland. Widening the road, but allocating space to all of the users through sharrows and other items, and actually getting cyclists out and active on the road will actually result in a safe environment and will moderate speeds based on the conditions that are there. So if the arrows are there, the signs are there, the divided area coming up the hill, and part of my career spent at the District of North Vancouver, where we had a number of hills where we actually did something very similar, where we provided a higher level of service on one side of the road to reflect the challenges and the speeds, and a different standard on the other side. Worked very, very well. So I wasn't intending to speak today. I was here to listen actually mainly to the earlier report on the 2024 plan, which I think is 2 thumbs up, but just at your urging, thought I would take the opportunity to say I support the staff's recommendations, and I think the final result will work very well, and I would encourage all the cyclists to get out there and use it, and it will make it work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who wishes to come forward? I guess one last call here. I don't see other people coming forward, so I'm going to come back to this table then, and we'll have a discussion. Thank you, Mr. Rennick, for turning off the microphone. Back at this table, we have had questions, we've had comments from the public, we have a lot of correspondence, and we have a recommendation here. But at the end of the day, it's back to this table as to what we want to do with that. I can certainly start with the motion to receive. That's always a simple one that we tend to get agreement on. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? No. All those in favor? Unopposed? Unopposed. We have received the report. Now, somebody want to make a motion, and we can maybe talk to a motion? Councillor Smart, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll put a motion forward that staff provide council with a concept drawing and Class C estimate for Phase 2 of the McNeil Avenue traffic calming project using option B, which widens the road by relocating the curb on the north side of the road to add a buffered bike lane.
Sorry, that's not, so can you just read it again, your motion?
That staff provide council with a concept drawing and a Class C estimate for Phase 2, and then the rest is as written.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that? Second. Moved and seconded. Floor is yours, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. I appreciate staff's recommendation of the approach. However, before potentially spending $1 million, I feel like we owe it to ourselves and the public to see a concept drawing, and to make sure that this is the way we want to proceed. There's a lot of intricacies, and I'm not totally convinced about how they're going to resolve as far as sight lines at the intersection. And so I just feel like it's due diligence for ourselves and the community to see a concept drawing before we go straight to working drawings.
Thank you. Before I go to the seconder, I'm just going to turn to Mr. Rennick. Having heard that, I just want to make sure I'm clear about the ramifications on timelines and if you have a clear understanding of what a conceptual drawing would mean in this case.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I believe I have a clear understanding of what the intention of the motion is. The impact on the timeline is it would potentially be a month to 6 weeks before we are returning to council with that conceptual design and that Class C estimate. Would then have the potential, it would make things a little bit tighter, making the fall intake for the application. However, the fall intake is not the be-all, end-all. I would note that yes, the design grant does pay for 60% of eligible project costs, but it's not a guarantee. It's not council's only prerogative to fund projects. They could fund them entirely themselves. And so just basically the impact on project timeline of creating a conceptual design and a Class C estimate is adding approximately 1 month to 6 weeks additional time.
Thank you for that. Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship. So yeah, I think that having something that we can discuss with the community is important. Part of the tricky part for me here as well is that this is one project with a fairly substantive cost, because it does require, depending on which option is selected, it requires a fairly significant intervention to adjacent properties, which is going to become a reality with our active transportation projects. One of the issues, though, is that we can't see it because we haven't received yet the active transportation update and an analysis of other priority projects. We are kind of considering this in its current form in a bit of a vacuum. So I want to be clear that I absolutely think that there needs to be a phase 2 intervention and a redesign of that intersection. It's a critical piece. But in the absence of a holistic view of other priority projects for the community that council has yet to discuss, it's a little difficult. So I do like the idea of a revised or of a visual that we can discuss and something that we can assess on the ground, and moving forward still with a cost estimate, even though it's a little bit of a delayed timeline. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Just for my clarification, sorry, I just want to make sure I'm clear about what this. So you mentioned sort of that slight 4 to 6 week delay overall. Is that because it's still then, if council agrees to the design, the conceptual design and Class C estimate, are we required to go and get a detailed design and Class B estimate after that in any case? Or what is required for? I'm just curious about with that. Is that a multi-step process at that point?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Mayor. If council were to direct us to proceed with a detailed design on the option B widening as per the staff recommended option, a conceptual design would happen as a step in that process. So what I said could take 4 to 6 extra weeks would really be if we produce that conceptual design, it goes back in front of council and council says, no, we don't want to do that. Please do something else. If that conceptual design is produced, brought in front of council, and council says, looks good, proceed to detailed design, at that point, there's not really going to be a significant impact on the project other than telling the consultant, okay, you guys need to take a break while we give council time to discuss it. I did note that Councillor Appleton made mention to sharing the design with the community. No public consultation timeline was built into my 4 to 6 week estimate.
Thank you. And you still have the floor if you want. I'm just interjecting myself for a little bit to.
No, I appreciate
some
that, Your Worship,
clarification.
and I appreciate Mr. Rennick's comments. When I say share with the community, my intent would be to provide that information design-wise in the same way that we've provided the Phase 1 designs, which is through the Connect Oak Bay portal and having that be available to the community. I wasn't contemplating a full engagement process for that one piece, but I appreciate Mr. Rennick bringing it up. And I do appreciate staff's assiduousness in keeping the information on the Connect Oak Bay website up to date. I've been pointing to lots of residents towards that because obviously the Phase 1 information that's loaded there obviously speaks to the concern, which I believe is a little misplaced about the language being used, the mayor referenced about devolve and divert, which has never been a component of Phase 1. I want to be very clear about that. So the information that's made available by staff on that portal is key in helping address that community concern. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Watson?
Thank you. I do like the idea of having more information about how this would be designed, but I do feel that even given our initial understanding of how much it would cost to make the necessary improvement using this approach, it's a lot of money for a short amount of route. And I would be happy to ask for a conceptual design if we got more than one of them. I think that I would like to see a couple of options for dealing with that stretch, that one of which does not involve a separated lane, but involves different treatment of the roadway entirely for the whole stretch up into the intersection. Because I'm not, if we follow this path and we just have one design, we may close our eyes to other things that might still make it work the way we want it to as a shared roadway that don't involve as much expense and disruption. So I would actually like to propose an amendment to the motion, which is to ask for a, I don't have the motion in front of me. I know that Ms. Plouffe has written it down. Well, no, because we have Ms. Smart's motion on the floor, and I don't have it, I didn't write it down, but to make the request for two conceptual designs, one of which does not, one of which, a different conceptual, I don't know what it'll involve, but I'd like to see some different treatments that would cost less, that would still allow for safe shared use of that particular stretch of the roadway. Because I'm not convinced that there's only one way to do it, notwithstanding the comments we got from one of the speakers who came before us. So I am proposing an amendment to the motion for two conceptual plans.
Before I take a seconder for that, I just want to make sure, because it may not be necessary to have that. I'm just, Mr. Rennick, when the entire plan, before we split it into two pieces, I believe there was an alternate plan which essentially just kept the road the same but took out the parking and provided a separated bike lane. Is that design still around that we could include as part of the options?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that design option is outlined in the staff report tonight as Phase 2 Option A. That is essentially no parking at all between Victoria and Fowl Bay. It has a 1.7 to 1.9 meter wide bike lane on the uphill side of the road and a shared driving and cycling lane on the south side.
Thank you. So is that, would conceptual drawings for that be sufficient? I'm just trying to get a sense, because that would be the only option with a separated lane without changes to the road right-of-way width.
I'm not entirely sure. I think that in some treatments I've seen in my travels around the world, we could have a completely different paving treatment, which would also suggest some different things about how the road was to be used. I know that sharrows and paint do that sometimes, but also changes in surface texture can also do that. And that's not included in that particular design. So I want to think a bit, when I bring this forward, I'm thinking to look at something a bit broader than that, not the initial plan, because clearly we weren't happy with that, or we wouldn't have been looking at option 2, but I'm not quite happy with just sticking to one proposal for option 2, which is going to be very expensive.
So the motion on the floor is to include two conceptual drawings with no definitions other than also includes a separated bike lane. On the uphill portion, okay.
Sorry, no, it doesn't have to have a separated bike lane. It just needs to create a safe shared roadway. I'm not so sure
Okay,
that
fair.
we need that. So I don't even want to go there because I'm not sure that that's necessary.
No, thank you. I just want to make sure I'm capturing the intent here correctly. So a safe shared roadway, so we have a mover and a seconder for that motion. So this is an amendment to the motion right now to include a second conceptual drawing. Okay, I'm going to turn to staff again on this one just for a second. I'm going to go to you, Mr. Rennick. I'm not sure if there's, I know we've already gone out and asked for a bunch of different options from Watt. Is there, I'm just seeking ideas on options. Is it possible, do you think, realistically, to come up with new options that haven't been brought forward previously in terms of conceptual drawings?
Through you, Mayor, the initial report that was presented to Council in 2022 Committee of the Whole had a couple of set assumptions that McNeil was going to remain a collector, that it was going to remain a two-way street, that it was going to preserve as much parking as possible. What Councillor Watson is asking would be essentially generating a new report with a new set of assumptions that would potentially generate a new end product. However, I don't know what those assumptions are. So I'm a little concerned with the motion that Councillor Watson has presented because I'm not exactly sure what conceptual design I'm being asked to produce.
Okay, to the seconder, anything you wish to add, and I'll go to other comments.
No, please go to other comments.
Okay, I'll go to Councillor Smart and then Patterson.
Yes. Yeah, no, thank you. I'm in favor of the amendment because I'm in favor of having a backup plan should we see the concept drawing and of the one option and not feel like it's the way we want to proceed. And I feel that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Watson, but that it's really almost more around the intersection perhaps that some of this detailing might look at. I guess I'm thinking about the fact that yes, this is a collector road, but it's also right up against the Richardson Bikeway. And so having a transitional moment that is about safety where you're going from 30-kilometer-an-hour roads to a 40-kilometer-an-hour road with a very wide open intersection, is an opportunity to look at that intersection design in detail and basically say to the community, you're entering a shared bikeway and this is about the safety of children. Like I can imagine that there might actually need to be some narrowing, some planters, some slow down, some, to the beginning of this collector road. So I appreciate the challenge that might be involved in the parameters of it, but I think that basically speaking to creating a moment of safety at that intersection with another option would be very valuable to council.
Well, maybe I'm just going to put this back to the mover for clarification, because I think, to Mr. Rennick's point, is the intention to change any of those assumptions in that design piece, the ones that he laid out there?
To be fair, I don't entirely know, but it might challenge the assumption, which I didn't truly appreciate was supposed to be integral to this for every segment of the road, is the preserved parking one. I know in general preserved parking would be an idea, but I didn't necessarily understand that it meant for every segment of the road. So yes, it's questionable whether the preserved parking is in my mind when I think about that concept. So fair enough.
In fairness, that isn't an absolute requirement. It was just part of the design parameters, and some of the designs came back without parking, and that was the other option provided.
Yes, if I may, the comment was preserve parking as much as possible, and it's simply a reflection that Runnymede is very narrow and Falkland is very narrow, and there's already parking pressures on those streets, and so we were trying to strike a balance. Certainly it was not to say all parking must be saved, because that was not the case.
Anything else, Councillor Watson? I can leave it there for now.
Not really, no.
Okay, no, it's fine. On the amendment, Councillor Patterson?
Yes, just a clarification, because Mr. Rennick said that Phase 2, Option A would be more aligned with with the amendment proposed by Councillor Watson. And so through you to Mr. Rennick, Mayor, Phase 2, Option A was a design that we contracted to Watts Consulting. Is that correct? We've done so many iterations of this. I'm just wanting to clarify that for myself.
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, to Council, yes, that's correct. We already have a conceptual design for Phase 2, Option A.
Thank you. Councillor Green? The amendment.
I know, and I really appreciate what Councillor Smart is trying to get at, but with the community engagement that has already occurred in writing to all of us, and it's been overwhelming today to get through it all, with the confusion around what is intended and what is not intended, and we've referred back to the portal, which is really important. The absence, unfortunately, of a communication strategy. Obviously, staff made this recommendation for a very important and valid reason. I am not a traffic engineer, and I live in the neighborhood, and I do know what some of the challenges are on McNeil. I'm also concerned that we also have an accessibility legislation that has been recently introduced by the province and adopted. We are in the formation of putting together a committee. I don't know what the accessibility considerations are either for this strip and for this stretch. There may be some accessibility issues that we haven't looked at, and we may come to those later on. I'm concerned about the delay, a month to 6 weeks, and that doesn't include any public engagement component. So I guess I'm really wanting to stay with the staff recommendation because, in fact, the staff at this stage of the game are the experts. I'm not. And I am mindful of all of the feedback we've received today, which expresses a lot of concern. And I don't want to further confuse the issue for the public because I'm sure there will be takeaways from this discussion and people will run away with some of the information that may not be necessarily accurate. So I guess I feel that if we stay with what has been recommended, it's clear, it's accessible, online to the public, and we can discuss it because we can see it right before us. If we stray from this recommendation, then I'm worried about further confusing the public who are already very concerned about the future of McNeil. And I too am concerned about the safety aspects. But I think the accessibility piece is something we can't overlook either. Thank you.
Thank you. On the amendment, I'll just speak briefly. I think I'm sort of torn on this one. I always like to have more information if it's possible. That's if there's options out there, I want to explore them. I had a lot of notes on my own, which I thought I still have a lot of of using sidewalk level bike lanes because it creates a nice physical barrier as well. And in this stretch would be, I think, cheaper, but in walking the site and things, I understand why the recommendations were made the way they were. I'm cognizant of timing. I do think most of these things about transportation should move forward, not be just waiting on grants, but I think that where we have very expensive ones, they're very much tied to grants. I mean, talking 60% is $600,000 or more, so it's a not an insignificant amount of money to seek. So I'm very cognizant of the fact that anything that delays timing on this one, I wouldn't want to see that harm it. So I think, to my mind, this is a bit of a balance between do we have enough information on the previous reports to feel like we've had enough design options, or is the timing and are we in danger of endangering the timing? So I'm probably leaning in this one towards not supporting the motion. Just I don't know what else would come out of it other than the reports that we've already had on it. I don't know. This is a bit of a tough one on the amendment. I appreciate the spirit definitely from where it's coming from. I think that the more design options we have, the better. I just feel like we should have gone through the multiple options portion of it to this point. But I'll have an open mind on this one and listen to my peers. If there's any other discussion, go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor to staff, just one clarifying question. I just wanted to know, what is the earliest that this Phase 2 might actually get constructed, considering the infrastructure improvements that need to be made, and then Phase 1 and then Phase 2? We're so concerned about getting a grant in for this year, but really when is phase 2 likely to happen?
Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, potentially summer 2025 as an earliest, because that allows us to get the utility work out of the way. If it's one of the options where we're working within the existing road right of way, it could be faster than that, because it could be as simple as paint that we could really do anytime. If I may, Mr. Mayor, just recognizing the concern of not wanting to have only one option, and recognizing that we have the option A that's basically already conceptually designed. If it were the will of council, when we were to come back with a conceptual design, we could just do an apples to apples comparison of the option A and the option B from this report. I believe that's one option that could address some of the council concerns.
My feeling, if this motion passes, that might be what comes back to us on these ones. All right, so we have a motion on the floor for amendment. Councillor Patterson, do you wish to speak to the amendment again?
Yeah, I appreciate the comments, but it does seem to me like we have spent a considerable amount of council time at the table discussing the McNeil bike lane. And I know that members of council view this as very important, as do members of the community, and I support it. I do also, though, share Councillor Green's concerns that we haven't considered the active transportation options for this in terms of those who are disabled. We don't have that committee established yet to review that, and we still have an absence of any active transportation for pedestrian active transportation. Staff, going back to the original, which is phase 2 option A, staff did as requested, which was to bring us as a council a project that would improve traffic calming and safety on the street at a reasonable cost to fit with our budget. That is option A. We have that. It may be less than perfect, but staff did as requested. So I could support staff recommendation and going forward with a conceptual for option B if it got us to closer to a conclusion of what we actually might accept as a council and a community on this. But I would do that with the caveat that at $1 million, this project now has gone from 10,000 basically calming and a kind of an operational improvement pending the infrastructure. But we're now, with the adjustments made by council, we're up to potentially $1 million project. So it's considerably more. That's equivalent to 3% of budget. And I don't feel that we're near to having full support of, yes, this is what we want, either at the council table or the community. So I won't support the option for yet another one. I will support just conceptual drawing as recommended, or a recommendation of staff, and perhaps the conceptual drawing to get us to that. But I'm not even certain that conceptual drawing is required. I think we could get enough just from what staff are recommending to get us into understanding whether we're going to get a grant. If we don't get a grant, I think the problem before council is how to fund $1 million project in the context of all of the other projects the staff have presented tonight and the staff time that has to be spent on those. So I'm leaning towards just supporting the staff recommendation, unless there is something that council could convince me with, a new conceptual drawing would really nail this project down.
I'm going to turn back to the mover really quickly here. What I'm hearing from staff right now is just a little confusion about what, or concern about what they can and can't provide on this. So what I've heard is that they can easily provide, both option A and B with conceptual drawings and price estimates. more than that, they're going to be, without some additional direction from council, probably at a bit of a loss as to what they might bring back. So I'm just curious from the mover's perspective, is the option A and B with those pieces going to be sufficient to meet the spirit of this motion, or would you like to? I'd just like to hear from the mover on this one, Councillor Watson.
Yeah, I think not quite, because I think when I just want to say that, as Councillor Patterson has just pointed out, the option B, regardless of which taxpayer is paying for it, is a lot of money. And to think about that total expenditure for the amount of roadway improved. I'm also very cognizant of the fact that already coming out of the gate, we have a lot of misunderstanding about what we're trying to do here. And that whatever we do actually get to, we want it to work very well and be well received. It's our first major project of this ilk. So I'm concerned that going forward with just option A and option B compared may not yet be enough. We didn't like option A for some reasons. And option B is, it's like going from 0 to 100. If you compare the two in a way, option A is more like the plan that continues down the street. Option B is a very, very expensive approach to solving a short amount of roadway. And I don't know what it is, but I would hope that there's something in between those two things that would give us an improvement and also cost less money. So it's more advanced than option A. It's not as expensive as option B. And I don't want to lose that opportunity because I don't really think we've gone there yet. So, I mean, I will let the chips fall, but I don't really want to amend my motion to...
Okay, that's fine. So the motion on the floor is at this point to, as worded, to bring back, to add a second conceptual design and pricing, costing to the original motion. Any other discussion? So I'm ready to call the question. Those in favor and those opposed. I have Councillor Green, Appleton, Murdoch, and Patterson opposed. So that fails. So we're back to the original motion. Just given the nature of the conversation, though, it may be healthy for us to make a motion to include the Class A drawings as part of the report coming back. Option A, sorry, just so we have that comparison in front of us at the table. But if not, if people are willing to just move forward,
I'll make that motion.
It's moved and seconded. Councillor Braithwaite, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really on board with what Councillor Watson was saying. I find that there has to be something in between spending $1 million and $10,000 that is going to be appropriate for what we're looking to do. So I hope we can find that, because to spend $1 million on this, on that short piece of roadway, I think will not sit well with a lot of our residents. I think we could spend our money in a better way. And so I hope we can find something that is somewhere in between.
Moved. So any other discussion on that motion, which is basically to include the second design? This is already provided design, but it's just really to help clarify the pieces at the meeting, but I'm not sure. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not going to support this motion for the same reason that I didn't support the previous amendment, which is option A, in my view, needs to be discarded. Option A is a paint on the ground solution, which is a viable option in a spectrum of options, but it is no longer how active transportation infrastructure is established. So there are a number of different potential options beyond that, but active transportation design should, in my view, be trending towards the best, the closest version of all ages and abilities possible, and option A doesn't achieve that. And I will just note that the motion, the subject of discussion here is not to spend $1 million on this project. The motion being considered is the design, and when the design is prepared and the design is accompanied by associated materials, council can consider that design in conjunction with the forthcoming
active transportation documentation and consider their options with respect to projects overall. So we require detailed design in order to scope the cost of this project. But I want to just sort of clarify at this stage of the game for members of the public who have demonstrated concern about the project that that is not actually what's on the table at this stage. So I would like to see us proceed to that detailed design so that we can have all the options in front of us.
The motion on the floor is currently for conceptual design, but yeah, just for clarification of language. Any other discussion on the motion that's in front of us? This is the amendment motion to include include option A in the two options that come back with conceptual design. Well, I did suggest it got put forward as a motion. I actually, I think it's good that we're having this conversation. I think it's important. I'm not going to support the motion. And just to articulate why, really, I think expanding on what Councillor Appleton said, we had a long discussion last meeting where we contemplated that option A, and in the balance of all other aspects, we said, you know, that maintenance of the parking on that street, just recognizing the real hardship of that area, is a problem. Actually, you know what? I'm going to change my mind on that one. I am going to support the motion because I think there may be some potential pieces that we can talk about, and I'll raise them as part of the primary motion. So I'll leave it there. I guess probably in fairness I should explain that because that's a little strange turnabout. One of the letter writers comment on the fact that there are other things we could do that could help address some of the complicating factors on some of these roads. As an example, he suggested, you know, could we not contemplate changing the allowable paved surface on the front yard so that cars can more easily, if you have two cars, could both park in that front area, which is quite difficult with the 25% lot coverage. And actually just considering that as part of these, you know, on a collector road, just changing it from 25% to 40% as an example so that people could easily park two cars in the front yard and relieve some of that pressure on the roads. I think there are some potential options we might have with option A or with option B that might allow us to still meet some of those middle grounds without the cost. So for that reason, I'd like to have some more time to contemplate some of the feedback that we've gotten, and I think some of them may apply to option A more than option B, so I will actually support the motion to come forward. So there we go. You get to listen to my rationale in real time. Is there any other discussion on the motion to amend? This is strictly to add, if this passes, it will add option A to the thing. Okay. Not seeing any. All those in favor? And those opposed? Councillor Appleton opposed. That carries. So right now the motion is to bring back a conceptual design of option B with a Class C estimate of cost, and a conceptual design and costing for option A will also now be included as part of that report, so we can have that as comparison. And if this passes, we expect that back probably sometime in the next 6 weeks or so for us to consider. We hope. Can't promise anything on timeline sometimes because it's staff dependent. Any other discussion on the motion now amended? Hey, Councillor Gray.
I'm reminded of the metaphor that we have a wonderful horse that we send to committee and it comes back looking like a camel. So I want to make sure this is still a horse at the end of the day, because it's very difficult to have these conversations at the table when we're not fully qualified in this area. But I am very mindful of the public input that we've had, and I'm very mindful of how my colleagues are feeling about these issues. So it's a struggle for sure. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other discussion on this one. Oh, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. I'm not going to support this because I guess I go back to staff's original recommendation, and it's made within the context of staff understanding what their work is right now on all of these other things. And I think whether it's a camel or a horse, I don't know, but obviously, the best place to have started would have been with what was below the ground rather than what was above the ground. But I recognize that the first request to staff was to bring a modest project forward, which they did, and definitely the horse has grown and probably added a hump. But nevertheless, I don't think for where I am wanting to get to, and that is simply to the recommendation of staff to get this to a point where they could bring it forward just simply to get it in the pipeline to see if it's achievable for grant funding or not. I think that's sufficient, because I think that and I recognize and appreciate what Councillor Watson said, no matter whose pocket it is coming out of, it is a very high-ticket item, but at least then we will know to some extent the cost of the project. We will also know where it stands for potential grant, and if, though, in the context of our review of the project, those change in any way, if we were not to get to grant funding, or if there was a reduced amount of grant funding, we could very likely, as a council, have to go back to the drawing board within the context of the total financial plan and what we need to achieve and our commitment to the tax increase for this year. So staff's original recommendation will achieve that without having to go to the additional cost and the additional time requirement and additional work for staff to get it there, to simply get it into the pipeline streams for us to consider at financial plan time. So I won't be supporting this simply because I don't think that I have heard sufficient at the council table that gives me confidence that even council are confirmed on what they need and want on the road. I know certainly from all of the letters we've received, there's a lot of questions still by the public, and so I think that simply following staff's recommendation on this report will achieve getting us to the point where we need, so that we can examine it more fully as council. If the grant stream funding comes through and we know how we sit in the overall financial stream, then I have no doubt that once again McNeil Bike Lane will get a lot of input at the council table and at the community. And so I'm not going to support the going to the conceptual drawing at this point in time.
Councillor Green?
I just have a question, if I may, through you to Mr. Rennick. Will this amended motion, through you, Mayor, Mr. Rennick, will it create a capacity issue over the short term in your department? Thank you.
Mr. Reddick?
Through you, Mayor, no, we have the ability to absorb. Essentially, it's just writing another staff report and providing some more input to the designer. I don't foresee it causing a significant capacity crunch for us.
Thank you.
Any other comments before I call the question? Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
I think that, I think I know how this is going to go, and I'm wondering if, based on the amount of correspondence that we received, that had a huge concern about the McNeil bike lanes and the changes that we might be going, that we might kind of let the public know somehow what this next step is, and whether that's in a little something that we do tonight, that you basically say what this means is XYZ, or something that we do as a communication out to the public. I think that might really help based on the amount of correspondence that we received.
Yeah, thank you. I was planning on putting together, there's a lot of correspondence still coming in right now on this. And it's really an interesting one. So it needs, I think, a crafted response, because there's a lot of the comments are on things that don't exist, and some of them are on phase 1, and we're talking about phase 2, and there's a lot of things. Just generally speaking, the plan is to write back to people. I'm probably going to be a bit of a form letter just because of the number, but it'll be a bit tricky to write just because of you're addressing a lot of different concerns raised on a bunch of different issues, and many of them are not factual based. So it's going to probably take a little bit of extra work, but yes, that's the intention. I don't think it requires a motion at this table to respond. And I'm ready to call the, Councillor Green.
Sorry, just one last comment on that note, following Councillor Braithwaite's comments. The public engagement piece for this project is critical. And as Councillors Watson and Appleton pointed out, and others, this will be the first major infrastructure project we do for bike lanes that is new. So I can't emphasize enough how important the public engagement piece is, and that we get correct information to the public so that they're not confused.
Thank you. Any other comments before I call the question? All right, I'm going to call the question. Then before I do, I'll just say I am speaking in favor of the motion as amended. When it was first raised by Councillor Smart for the conceptual, I wasn't too keen on it. I was more interested in moving it forward, but I do appreciate the comments that have gone on here, and I'm heartened by Mr. Rennick's comments that the conceptual drawing is a phase that has to be gone through anyway, and so making sure that's not going to think. I do think this is one of those ones that is going to have a grant attached to it if we move it forward. But I would also say, of all of the various things that we have on our piece right now, most of the other upgrades happening, with the exception of maybe the halting crossing and a few other bits and pieces, this uphill section where it's crossing different municipal boundaries and different speeds and everything else, I think is one area that we can actually really add a significant amount of safety to, more so than many of our roads. And so I think it deserves to be a priority and deserves to be thought through pretty carefully. So I'm very appreciative of the staff report and the discussion here that has amended this to allow it to move forward in a way that I think will create some clarity for the public as to what's actually going to be happening. All right, with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And those opposed? Councillor Patterson opposed. I believe that concludes our this. Yeah, no, 7.2 is, I meant to conclude 7.2. I'm not done yet, quite yet. If you guys want to stick around, we have one more item on the agenda, but you're more than welcome to leave as well. This one is, there's no new business, I don't believe. Nobody's informed me there was, so we'll move to 11.1. Councillor Appleton, this is a notice of motion you put forward. You don't have to read there's no whereases, but if you could read the motion into the record.
Absolutely, Your Worship. Thank you very much. So my motion that I'm bringing forward tonight is that staff be directed to acquire a flag for the district from the Flags for Juneau 80 campaign for a donation of no less than $500. And that staff be directed to arrange for the flag to be flown at the Oak Bay Cenotaph during the week of June the 2nd, 2024, to recognize the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings on June the 6th, 2024. And further, that once the flag has been lowered after the week of recognition, that council consider an appropriate format to display the flag, or in the alternative, to donate it to a worthy organization or individual.
Seconded. Do you wish to add anything to the motion?
Just, Your Worship, obviously it's a significant observance this year for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. There were Oak Bay residents and Oak Bay folks who passed through Juneau Beach in the days after the D-Day landings, and some of them did not return. Obviously, Juneau Beach is a significant national site for all Canadians. And the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings is a significant observance for us. So the Flags for Juneau campaign provides flags that have been flown at the Juneau Beach Centre in Normandy. And so I think it would be, and they encourage organizations and communities from across the country to acquire the flags and display them prominently as a remembrance of those that fell on D-Day and in time afterwards. So I would seek council's endorsement of this acquisition. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Is there any questions or discussion on this matter? Councillor Patterson.
Just a comment, I do appreciate this. Both my grandfather and my father were at Normandy. One was overage, one was underage. But nevertheless, so it certainly resonated with the family, and unfortunately neither of them are here to see this observation anymore. But it still is, it's very meaningful for the sacrifices that were made that day.
Councillor Green.
Likewise, I really appreciate Councillor Appleton's motion, and I will support it wholeheartedly.
All right, seeing no dissenting voices, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed?
Move adjournment.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed? We are adjourned. Well done, folks, sticking it out to the very end. Have a great evening.